I declare open this public hearing of the Joint Committee of Public Accounts and Audit for the inquiry into the 23-24 and 24-25 major projects reports, and I thank the witnesses for being here today. I call on representatives from the Department of Defence and the Australian National Audit Office, and for the Hansard record, could you please state your name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee. But given we have quite a number of witnesses, and instead of everyone saying your first name and a favourite food starting with the first letter, maybe if you, when you come up to the table, just introduce yourself. But for those at the table, if you could begin, and then we'll go to the Audit Office as well.
Thank you, Chair. Celia Perkins, Acting Associate Secretary Defence.
Yeah, Chris Deeble, Deputy Secretary, Capability Acquisition and Sustainment Group.
Thank you.
Carolyn Clesh, Auditor General. Rona Mello, Deputy Auditor General.
Ian Goodwin, Group Executive Director, Performance Audit.
Renina Boyd, Acting Executive Director, Performance Audit.
Welcome, everyone, and welcome to the witnesses who inevitably will participate in this hearing. This hearing is a formal proceeding of the Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of the Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. I remind all present that as Chair, I'll ensure the proceedings are conducted in an orderly, respectful and courteous way. The committee members are again reminded that public officials should not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy, but questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted are appropriate. Witnesses are also reminded that any claim that it would be contrary to the public interest to answer a question must be made by a minister and accompanied by a statement setting out the basis for the claim. I'll now invite the Department to give any opening remarks and also the Auditor General following that, and then we'll open up for a discussion.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have a short opening comments, if that's okay. Defence appreciates the opportunity to discuss the 23-24 and 24-25 major projects report. We'd like to acknowledge the extensive work of the Australian National Audit Office and the Defence staff in preparing the report each year over the last 18 years. Defence welcomes JCPAA's, the committee, recent observations regarding the improvements in Defence's accountability, project governance, budget reporting and oversights of projects of concern and projects of interest. Regarding the 23-24 MPR and the 24-25 MPR, the ANO's analysis highlighted that the overwhelming majority of the government-approved scope across the report's forecast to be delivered with high confidence. None of the 21 projects in the 23-24 or 24-25 reports had a real cost increase in either of the financial years. Budget increases since initial second pass approval are predominantly due to Australian government-approved additional scope and exchange variation, as is typical for Defence major capital investment projects of this size and scale. In the in-year schedule slippage saw improvement in 24-25 MPR with an aggregate delay of 404 months compared to 442 reported in the 23-24 MPR. Around half of the total aggregated delay was due to slippage in 3 projects, including a 93-month slippage, 23% for Air 5431, Phase 3, the Civil Military Air Traffic Control System, a well-known project of concern. Overall, Defence's performance against cost, scope and schedule is relatively strong, given the ambition and complexity of its portfolio. It is also quite similar to international partner nations such as the United States and the United Kingdom. Finally, in 24-25, the Auditor General did not issue a qualification over lessons learned and determined that the requirements of the MPR guidelines have been met. I thank the Chair for the opportunity to make an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr Deeble. Auditor General.
Thank you, Chair. The ANAO is grateful for the opportunity to support the Committee's inquiry into the 2023-24 and 2024-25 Defence Major Projects Report, or MPR. I provided my opening statement to support this inquiry in the usual way, but if it suits the committee, I'll also make a few remarks. And first, I'd like to acknowledge the Joint Committee, the committee's communication of 6th of March 26, where the committee resolved not to request the Department of Defence and the ANAO to continue to produce the MPR. And I would also like to acknowledge that the President of the Senate wrote to me on the 1st of April 2026, drawing attention to the resolution of the Senate requesting that I reinstate the MPR. I provided a response to the President of the Senate today, advising that I had formed a view that the NPR is no longer fit for purpose in its current form, and included a copy of my letter to the JCPAA of 8th of December 2026, where I provided that same view. And with the permission of the Chair, I'd like to table my response to the President of the Senate. I am committed to maintaining or enhancing the ANAO's assurance over Defence's acquisition program. The ANAO has recently commenced a performance audit of Defence's management of its capability investment priorities, which will bring transparency to capability investment performance and how Defence manages the biennial Integrated Investment Program, or IIP. I'm also finishing a performance audit on Defence's Collins-class Life of Type Extension program, and have proposed a number of potential audit topics focusing on Defence's acquisition and sustainment in my 2026-27 annual audit work program. The ANAO is also auditing Defence's performance statements, which includes a measure on capability delivery, Performance Measure 6.1, and will be the second year of auditing this measure. This is in addition to auditing Defence's annual financial statements, of course. My tabled opening statement provides information specific to the 2023-24 and 2024-25 NPRs, including that the ANAO has drawn attention to the Parliament through an emphasis of matter on the non-publication of certain information by Defence. The ANAO has raised concerns on diminished transparency provided in the NPR as a result of the non-publication of information. The 18th NPR, the 2024-25 NPR, was presented to the Parliament on the 17th of December 2025. This included 21 major projects with total approved budget of $81.5 billion, representing 32% of the total of Defence's acquisition budget. In the 24-25 NPR, the total average slippage was 21 months, and in 2023-24, it was 25 months. Budget variations since initial second pass approval totalled around $37 billion, and of this, Hunter-class frigate and Joint Strike Fighter accounted for around 81%. In finalising the ANAO's 2026-27 annual audit work program, I will carefully consider, of course, the priorities of the JCPAA and other parliamentary committees following the consultation process. I plan on tabling the program in July 26 and acknowledge the importance of continuing a program of audit work to support the Parliament with respect to transparency and accountability on Defence's acquisitions, capability management and sustainment performance. And we look forward to assisting the inquiry, the committee in its inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you for your opening statements. And the committee can accept the tabling of the response to the President of the Senate. Thank you. And I think it will be circulated amongst members if we don't already have it. Okay. Let me just get my notes in order. So thank you, and Ms. Steeble, good to welcome back. Good to see you since last year. So I guess let's start from just some of the. We'll just go sort of project per project, just a couple of specific questions, and maybe some of the ones around scope changes. If you can just fill in the blanks for me. So. Let's start with the offshore patrol vessel. So originally the second pass approval was for, in November 2017, it was for $3.639.1 million for 12 vessels. And then in February 24, it was reduced from 12 to 6 vessels. Is it still 6 vessels that's part of the scope?
I'll just refer you to Commodore Pete Mingay.
Welcome, Commodore.
Yeah, Commodore Peter Mingay. I'm acting head of patrol boats and specialist ships.
And so my question was, is there still 6 vessels as part of the scope of that project?
Yeah, that's correct.
But the total budget approved is the same as it was originally?
That is correct. I think you noted that it had increased slightly, and that is the case. It's around 3.7 billion. 3.7.
Okay. And any change in the capability of those 6 vessels in the original design?
From original, there, I think it has been recorded that the gun is no longer part of the scope, and that's been discussed, I think, quite recently as well.
Okay, so
Can I just...
please, Scotty.
Did I hear that right? So we've gone from 12 down to 6. The money stayed the same and the capability is less.
At the present time, the funding budget or the budget is slightly more, 3.7 billion, but there is a process that we are going through that will enable us to reduce that budget. But there's work still to be done with the company to go through a series of activities with them, and then the budget will be reduced. And that'll be in the next financial year.
So, given that the order's halved, is it the expectation that the value will halve?
No, that's not the expectation at all.
What is the expectation?
I'm not exactly sure of the outcome of those activities, but there will be a reduction, and it's still being worked through with the company.
So it could be less than 6? Is that what you're saying?
Number of ships remains
Right,
at 6. It's I think the question was around the budget being halved, the expenditure being halved. And
Right. So it's still at 3.7 billion allocated to it, but that hasn't been fully expended. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct.
Okay. And do we have an estimation of what we think the cost savings might be on that?
Not
or
at
the
this
reduction might be?
Not at this stage.
Cheryl Lutz, here representing DebtSec and SSG. That is being worked through. It's a long process to go through to de-scope all of the subcontracts and to determine what the values are, because obviously they would have ordered or set up to order 12 initially, and so we've had to go through a serious process with all of the subcontracts to reset them and also to reset the main prime contract.
What was the reason why you didn't choose to acquire 12 originally? Continue with the 12?
That was a decision by the independent analysis that was done on the surface fleet when they reduced the capabilities of the OPVs from 12 to 6 and Hunters from 9 to 6, and then they included the acquisition of the general purpose frigates.
Okay, maybe that's a good segue into the Hunter. So obviously this program accounts for the largest increase in expenditure. Is it possible to sort of break that down as to how it has increased in cost so much?
I can do that. Cheryl Lutz, FAS, Major Surface Combatant and Combat Systems. Hunter has had an increase from June 24 of just over 19 billion for the Batch 1 production contract. Previous contract was just the design and productionisation, where we did design work and the prototypes. We've now gone into Batch 1 production contract, which means we are completing the design and producing the first 3 ships. So in the original budget allocated for the second pass approval, that the actual construction of the first 3 ships wasn't included in that? In the approved budget that we went through, there was an overall budget that we went to government on. In the initial approved budget, it was just for design and productionisation that was approved.
But for the purposes of the... And
which didn't include production of the 3 ships.
Yeah.
The overall budget that was put forward to government included construction of all ships.
So, forgive me, just so my very sleepy brain can catch up. So we've gone from 12 ships to 6. The first phase wasn't budgeted for the actual construction of the first 3 ships. I was
talking Hunters, so we've gone from 9 to 6.
9 to 6, sorry. 9 to 6, but the first budget allocated didn't include budget for the actual building of the ships. It was just for the design, early works phase, and then that extra $19 billion was actually for the building of the first 3 ships.
That is correct. When the strategy, what was put to government was, at the time, 3 batches of 3 ships to be built, and they would be contracted separately. and they were going to be possibly different configurations in terms of minor upgrades and changes.
Yeah.
What the independent analysis of the surface fleet determined in February 24 was that we would produce 2 batches of 3 and they would be the same configuration.
So how much was the original budget before it was included in the actual ship production? Like for the first phase, how much was requested before we added the extra bit to build it?
You mean the design and productionisation?
Yeah.
It's in the 24th report, the numbers.
While you're looking at that, for that, Ms. Lutz, forgive my pronunciation, Mr. Goodwin, did you want to jump in there?
Just to assist the Chair, on page 49 of the MPR, table 4.3, it provides the longitudinal numbers from 2021 through to 2025 in terms of the budget movement, which is, I think, is part of what you're looking to inquire.
Yeah.
And then I'll just refer also to paragraph 4.13 on page 41. The first dot point on that page talks about the increase in the actual expenditure from $1.3 billion, which is $621 million higher than was in the PBS, around around that move for the commencement of the construction phase, which is the earlier part of your questioning.
So, thank you. So on the original budget submitted to government, there wasn't. It was explicit that there wasn't going to be any production included as part of that original budget in the 2020-2021 proposal.
The overall amount that was approved in 2018, June 2018, was for the total build, the total project costs. What was allocated?
And how much was that? Sorry, forgive me. How much was that?
44.3 billion.
44.3. Okay.
What was then approved, because we were doing it in phases, was the design and productionisation phase. And then when the design matures, then you have a better estimate of what your production costs will be. So it was design and productionisation phase approved, then when we're ready, go into batch 1 contract and then batch 2 contract.
Does that make sense? Okay. But then the decision to reduce the number of ships from 9 to 6 was in February 2024. Mm-hmm. But then the total amount allocated for the construction, so the 22 billion for 23-24 and 24-25 still was only for the first 3 ships.
The amount that was approved in government's second pass approval, 19.68 billion, which is only the NSSG amount. But if you go to table 4.3, mm-hmm. it goes up in 23-24 to 25.9 billion and then 26 billion 24, which is the FX exchange. That is to complete design, productionisation and build of the first 3 ships.
Right. So, and then the 24-25 is those 3 ships, that's just the continuation of that budget,
Yep.
or it's the next?
Yep.
Right.
The ships take 7 years to build.
7 years, yeah. So I guess I'm just sort of, I'm just trying to sort of get my head around it. So we've gone from the original total allocation was 44 billion, but the first 22 billion goes to 3 ships. And so in order to keep into the total amount, we had to take off the last 3 ships. Is that how it kind of worked? That's why?
No. The independent assessment determined the number of vessels that were required based on the capability required.
Sure, but that doesn't mean that. So the original budget's 44. Mm-hmm. And 22 gets you 3, and then another 22 gets you 44. So originally we wanted 9, and 44 was meant to go into 9, and now it's going into 6. So I'm just sort of interested in sort of the, yes, there was a IAP decision that was what we needed, but if we're assessing, costs, timelines, processes, actually it started off as 44 for 9, and then we got to 44 for 6. So that's what I'm trying to unpack here.
We haven't determined the price for 6 yet.
Right.
We haven't gone and got quotes for batch 2.
Right. So how much have we allocated for the first 3?
What was approved? 19.68.
19.6. Okay. And that'll get us that includes the amount spent on the design and production setup.
No, the 19.68 billion was for batch 1 construction, which was the 3 ships. Prior to that, the allocated amount for government second pass approval to build the ships was 5.782. These figures here include other costs that we have in terms of PMO in table 4.3.
Okay. Okay. So unless I'm missing something, so there's 5 billion to set up the program, 19 to build the first 3. The total amount in 2018 was $44 billion allocated, but over the period of the production, design, the allocation of funds, it's obviously gotten more expensive, and we've just made a decision to reduce the overall number of ships from 9 to 6. Is that fair to say?
Well, it's fair to say that it's got more expensive because we've had COVID. We've seen a significant increase in terms of the equipment costs. We've seen significant inflation to what was originally estimated. So when we went into the batch 1 costs, yes, there were increases in costs there that we would not have predicted in 2018.
When was the original timeline of when it was meant to be finished? Has the timeline for the construction and the production design changed much, or is it sort of remained constant? This was always the planned timeline, sort of.
That's been documented from when we changed cut steel. Cut steel was originally to end of 2022. We went to government in 21, and we changed cut steel to middle of 24. So there has been an 18-month shift there.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else have anything on the Hunter before I move on to Land 200? Sometimes when I say that, new people turn up to the desk. We'll move on to Land 200, if that's okay.
I'll answer those questions. If not, I'll take them on notice.
No problem. Thank you. So again, originally the budget for, and we did discuss this in last year's hearing. So just to refresh us. So the original budget for the second pass approval in 2017 was $930 million, and that's gone up to $972 million. But there was a reduction in 23.9% of scope, or that the minimum 23.9% of scope will not be delivered, 16% at risk. So that included the weapons integrated BMS capability, and part of the tactical communications network was de-scoped, and then the installation in 38 vehicles transferred to another project. But we kept the same budget.
That's correct, Chair, but I'd note that on the table 2.1 on page 173, there is a remaining budget of $158.5 million. So not all of that budget has been spent at this juncture. The total expenditure as of June 25 is $814.2 billion in that regard. 804,
okay.
Major General Richard Vagg can give some detail around the BMS if you require that in terms of the de-scoping elements.
Sure. Welcome, Major General.
Chair, thank you very much. Major General Richard Vagg, Army Headquarters. As discussed at the last hearing, we de-scoped the battle management system in 2020. That was driving us down a technical cul-de-sac. That scope was then removed. It was replaced with an interim BMS. The replacement for that will be brought forward under a project called Land 4140, which will be brought for government consideration in the coming years.
Okay. Can I ask a sort of general question and about sort of the minimum viability and capability, minimum viable capability? How many projects had changes to the minimum viable capability as part of the MPR?
Part of the, sorry?
As part of the major projects report, included in the major projects report, how many of them projects in this report had changes to the minimum viable capability?
I think the only project, from my understanding, I would look to Mr Goodwin, that had a minimal viable capability was Air 6500 in this context.
That's correct, Chair. In terms of the MPR as it stands at the time of the Auditor General signing, it's only the one that Mr Deebles mentioned.
Just the one, yeah.
It's just the one. I think it's just the one.
So then, can you explain to the committee like what constitutes a decision around changing the minimum viable capability?
Minimal viable capability is effectively initial operational capability, as we would define that. Major General Matthew Pearce will be able to talk about that from a VCDF perspective. Minimal viable capability allows us to look at agile delivery mechanisms, which might mean that there's some trade-offs. In a minimal viable capability context, you fix cost and schedule, and sometimes the scope varies to be able to deliver it within that framework. And that is the way in which an agile approach to delivering would be normally delivered. Minimal viable capability is used to describe what would be operationally acceptable, but I'll throw to Major General Pearce for some comments from a VCDF perspective.
Welcome, Major General.
Thanks, Chair. So minimum viable capability, we're really talking about an effect, and for us it's the military effect to achieve, for example, sea control. So that you might automatically think that involves frigates, but it also involves underwater capabilities, it involves space capabilities, potentially air and land capabilities. So it goes across the whole system, and instead of gold plating for a single platform, what we do is we have a look at the network effect we can get from all the different platforms, if that makes sense.
Right. So like doesn't if you decrease the number of vessels on a particular project, doesn't that affect the minimum viable capability?
So it'd be an assessment of how that integrated force comes together and what we need from the different platforms. So we may, for example, thinking back to the Hunter example, we made a decision through the independent audit team or independent assessment team. They needed 6 Hunters and then a number of Megami-class frigates. The combined effect of those would provide the surface fleet that we require for the joint force.
So the minimum viable capability is an assessment by Defence around what you need to do and your ability to do it, as opposed to a change in the scope of acquisition, more specifically, or a change in the budget or a change in the capability of a particular vessel. It's more sort of seen in the context of the overall requirement or the overall mission.
That's right, Chair. So it's a principle by which we design the force.
That makes sense. So and what impact does the minimum viable capability have on a project in terms of the reporting in the MPR and the reporting that happens in terms of deliverability of a particular project? So does it sort of reset the amount of the project that is sort of reported to be on track?
So because it's a force design principle, it's not something that we measure through delivery. Our delivery milestones are the initial operating capability and the final operating capability. Minimum viable capability is more the principle that underpins that, to say let's not over egg this, let's not gold plate it.
Chair, there is a dimension though that agile delivery allows you to approach the delivery of capability in a different way. And the agile approach allows you to get capability faster than we would otherwise get that. I can get Air Vice Marshal Martin Nuzio to talk about Air 6500 and how we've adopted that approach. And minimal viable capability was part of that program. It was the first at-scale agile delivery approach that we've tried to adopt. In doing so, getting capability faster to the field. Minimal viable capability is a way also in an agile context, allowing you to stick to cost and schedule. So you want to get the capability faster and varying the capability outcomes that you're seeking within certain parameters to achieve that outcome. But I refer to Air Vice Marshal Muzio in the context of Air 65.
Yeah. Thanks, Air Vice Marshal.
Thanks, and hello. Air Vice Marshal Martin Nussio, Head of Air Defence and Space Systems within KSG. So Air 6500, which is the Integrated Air and Missile Defence Command and Control Project, delivering the Joint Air Battle Management System and also a number of radars. Right from the get-go for the current tranche, delivering the Joint Air Battle Management System had a minimum viable capability defined, and that is referred to extensively in the NPR. So from a delivery perspective, we will set the target by force design, and we're delivering against that target. It's not a compromise, but it is allowing us to move quicker and to deliver to the joint force a capability that will be usable quicker.
And so, what has that actually meant in terms of how has the project changed since it was originally designed?
The project, I wouldn't say has changed. The project's been delivered, approved and delivered in tranches. So the current tranche, well, there's two tranches we're working that are reported in the NPR. That hasn't changed those at all. In fact, it was the aim point given to us by Force Design to aim for. What it has allowed us to do, though, is to tranche, like not go after the future tranches and have them all bundled in together. This is a better way to manage risk, get usable capability out sooner, and then build in additional complexity in the future tranches.
And so what was the future tranches looking at? What were some of the things you were going to do in the future tranches?
Well, future tranches for Air 6500 are likely to, of course, still subject to approval and still in that process, but they will scale up the Joint Air Battle Management System, provide more joint tactical operations centres, make them more mobile, so they'll be vehicle mounted, a lot quicker to evade, for example, missile attack. What it'll also do, though, is increase the complexity of the integration within the joint force, right? So making sure that the platforms, whether it's an F-35, air warfare destroyer, etc., that they're connected in a far more seamless way. Also, when it comes to interoperability with our allies, we're going to be adding more what we call bearers or connections with the major systems that our allies operate as well.
So, makes perfect sense. Was there any changes in the timeline of when you were meant to get the later tranches?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't know if Force Design or... No, not that I'm aware of.
Anything from the Auditor General?
Thank you, Chair. The point I'll probably make, I'll just make the point from the ANA and the Auditor General's perspective, which is around parliamentary scrutiny against how a budget is approved to a project. And the reason this is called out, so this is called out in paragraphs 2.19 to 2.21 of the report, is that we're not making a comment around whether the MVC is a right or a wrong concept. It's a concept that came out of the DSR and then nested in the NDS. What the comment we're making is that if the budget process is linked to ISFOC, how does accountability then, when MVC starts becoming prevalent? And the matter we just draw out is that MVC was a new concept at the time of this NPR and was still having to be rolled out and understood within Defence. In Air 6500, it was the only one, but it did not have an IOC and FOC. So in the Secretary's statement, the Secretary made a comment around FOC being allocated to the project. So as the NDS and the IIP rebuilds, MVC will probably become more prevalent.
So thank you, Mr. Goodwin. So from what you've just said, MVC is about getting to where you need to go sooner and being more agile about it. But by implication, that means that something has changed that you had to navigate because the original design isn't the same. Otherwise, why classify something as something different? Why not just keep it as the original plan? So I guess some things has to have changed. Otherwise, you wouldn't have needed to get there in a more agile way. If you can, yeah. What's changed?
If I could just make a comment around what it's allowing us to achieve. So what's changing is the threat is changing more quickly than it has for generations. The technology is changing. So even if the threat wasn't, we've still got to deal with changing computer systems, interfaces, etc., etc. So that's rapidly underway. So in that context, if in a traditional project for something delivering something like 6,500, you might define those future tranches might be in one big project, and by the time you actually get to design it and then start delivering it, it's already obsolete. You've missed out. I think this is an approach that's allowing us to deal with those realities of changing threat and technology, and allowing us to deliver more quickly, and then to iterate on that as the circumstances change.
Vice Marshal, that makes perfect sense. But the question that we've got as a parliamentary committee is that there is an initial request and approval by the Department of Defence, or by the government to the Department of Defence, for an initial second pass approval, which has an initial capability outline. There are tranches involved in that. And then Defence has created this for the first time as part of the MPR, this idea or this concept of saying that we need minimum viable capability, which isn't the specifics of a particular project, but rather it's seen within the overall context of the capability of Defence because of the very valid reasons that you just outlined. But the problem that we've got as a parliamentary committee is our job is to have oversight or to have visibility in some way, shape or form of what the acquisition actually was meant to be, how it's going, what the timeline is, what the budget is, and what you said you needed for the original amount of technology and how long it was going to get there, versus now where we are, which is now there's this new concept of, well, that's got to be seen within the total picture of the what we need to do, which gives us no visibility whatsoever. We just it might be true, but we don't get to see that. So I guess what I'm asking for is some assistance around what led Defence to not just stick with the original scope, but actually to say, no, we need to change this thing called we need a minimum viable capability, and so what's changed, and if things like cost and capability and technology and timing, that sort of stuff.
Chair, Celia Perkins, Acting Associate Secretary. I might start and Major General Pearce might add a bit of detail, because I think it's important for how the committee engages with minimal viable capability. As Major General Pearce has said, minimum viable capability is a concept. It was designed in the 2023 Defence Strategic Review, and an important element of the 2024 National Defence Strategy, reinforced in last week's 2026 National Defence Strategy. And it is a concept, as described, that both helps us design the whole of the force to get capability into service more quickly, to take, as Mr Deeble said, the opportunity for more agile delivery, and to enable the lowest acceptable mission performance to get into service. Why I think in this MPR there's only one, this will be a concept that we'll be using in the design of the whole force in projects moving forward. But what we have done in the way that we take both individual projects for approval to government and the entirety of the integrated investment program in that direction from government in the 2024 National Defence Strategy is set the concept of minimum viable capability as a design parameter, and agree those in the totality of the integrated investment program with government. For individual projects already in delivery, IOC and FOC, as those scope elements agreed by government and audited through the MPR, remain the milestones unless and until we agree with government a change to milestones, which then again will be part of the project and made transparent as appropriate. Would you add anything? Thank
you for that overview, Ms Perkins. But that doesn't change the position that categorisation puts this parliamentary committee, which is that essentially what used to be measured as part of the original NPR, that you had to give an initial operating capability, and then a final operating capability. So you had, this is what we need, and this is what we're going to deliver, and we can measure it and audit it and assess it. And this is the cost, and this is the direction. And that's a pretty simple start and finish concept. But now there's this new concept that says, which you know, I'm not. This is not passing judgment on the necessity of it, because you are the people in charge of that. Thankfully, not me. But what it does for the assessment of a parliamentary committee and of this report that is compiled by the Auditor General is that it basically makes it, if that is the way in which it was going to operate into the future, it makes this report essentially like pointless, because if you've got
obsolete by the time.
Yeah, it's because what it actually allows Defence to do is completely change the scope of what you need in order to declare this as a successfully delivered project, and like I've asked now a couple of times of what's changed in this project, and I haven't got an answer, and so I guess that's a big challenge for the committee.
Chair, if I could just add some dimension. The notion of minimal viable capability is akin to what industry would do with minimal viable product. And indeed, the material element of what we're delivering under minimal viable capability is the equivalent of a minimal viable product. In doing so, it is still very structured. What you do is fix cost and schedule, and you deliver the capability outcomes in those timeframes. There's a significant planning effort. As Air Vice Marshal Nuzio said, the difference is that it's not stated. We normally do functional and performance specifications to a high degree of certainty. If I compared what we're delivering in 27 months through the Air Battle Management, the Joint Air Battle Management Air 6500, we've done that we will have a minimal viable capability in 27 months. The equivalent program some years ago called Vigil Air took 10 years to get to the equivalent point that we've got. So the movement of...
But we don't get visibility of...
But it's still quite clear that you deliver capability in those 9-month tranches. They are fixed in budgetary terms, so the schedule and the cost is clear. The outcomes that we're trying to achieve in each one of those is clearly articulated, but not in a classical functional performance specification. Because the only way you can do that is to occasionally look at what needs to be traded off. As the threat changes, or as the technology changes, that would still have to fit within those cost and schedule parameters, and it would still be subject to Defence making a determination that the outcomes achieved were fit for purpose and had operational utility.
Chair, if I can just build on what Mr Deeble said.
Sure.
So what we're talking about from MVC is a design principle. There is still absolutely the existence of our delivery milestones, IOC and FOC. They just haven't been agreed by government yet, is my understanding for this particular project. So it's just detail that hasn't been refined.
Okay. In the major project report, the PDSS states actually that we intend to, as in Defence intends to have an IOC and FOC for this project moving forward. It just wasn't in place for this.
Isn't the IOC meant to be submitted for the second pass approval? Isn't that the usual? How does it?
I could just probably help clarify some of with reference to the report, Chair. So that is right. So in terms of what Major General Pearce mentioned, is that IOC and FOC wasn't, but the Secretary's statement that accompanied the NPR said that would go forward. But in terms of when you go to the PDSSs, because the PDSSs were referred to, so table 3.3 on page 278 of the PDSSs notes that beyond 2024, the operational capability milestones are NFP.
Yeah. Which you know, as an exercise in parliamentary oversight is a difficult one. Not that, and that is not a judgment on the assessment of why you put it as an FP, but there is a point behind my journey here, and we'll get to it in a second, I guess. Then my sort of, and I'm conscious I'm taking up a lot of time, and I'm happy to hand over to some colleagues in a second, but I just want to ask a couple more questions. Has there been any changes of any of the major projects that have been taken out of a phased, or out of phases and into a program?
Under the National Defence Strategy and the IIP in 2024, we had some 600 plus projects. Under that National Defence Strategy and the Integrated Investment Plan, we moved down to, I think, in the order of 280 programs of work. That was a consolidation of many projects and the cancellation of some projects in that time frame. So we do look at this in a much more programmatic context where we build capability over time in that regard. I'll throw to Major Pearce for any additional information.
So that makes sense. Thank you, Mr. Deeble. So you've got the projects enable you to do that, but that wasn't my question. My question was, have any of the major projects that in previous reports were in a phased assessment now been transferred into projects and allocated as a project and assessed as a project as part of this major project report?
I'd need to take that on notice, Chair, to give you that.
Because the reason why, thank you, the reason why I ask is that if it is deemed a project and it's not in phases, then the scope of delivery can change, can't it?
The scope of, in particular in this MPR, the comment that was made around Air 6000 is an example of that. The scope of the project can change. If you look at the Joint Strike Fighter program, there was 14 aircraft originally agreed by government and then a subsequent agreement on the additional 58 to take that to a total fleet of 72. There are a range of projects. The comment about C5000 is another example where you get a phase approved by government and then a subsequent phase for the production, as we discussed with C5000. So there are changes in scope, normally agreed by government in that context. $37 billion, as I think was noted in the Auditor General's opening comment, represent in the main those changes in scope. And other budgetary variations.
No, I appreciate that. So going back to my question, if you've got projects that were previously assessed in delivery in a particular phase and are now in a program, and yes, your example around the Joint Strike Fighters as increasing is an example, and there's budget allocated to that, and that makes sense. But I guess in terms of assessing whether or not Defence is meeting its initial capability, if you take something out of a phase and you put it into a program, doesn't it give Defence the ability to reset whether or not you're delivering the project, because you can reset the scope of the project as part of that move? You're not assessing it against the original second pass approval if you do that, is what I'm suggesting.
I think if I'd offer, Chair, were changes of the nature you described to be proposed by Defence, it would return for a government decision, and a change to any of the elements of scope, budget or delivery timeframe would need to be agreed by government and then would be reset as the new milestones, and that is an activity we do on a regular basis with government. Yes,
but that was not what I was talking about, which was if you have a project, and that project has its original operating capability, and there are two phases of that, and then you change and that is being delivered over a particular time frame, and then you change that into a program, you can change the scope of that program, and as part of the major projects report, which is what we're actually trying to inquire into, you can say that actually if you were delivering 80% of the project as part of the phased, but you're changing the scope and now you're delivering 99.9% of the project, but you've actually just changed the project, you're not marking it against the original operating capability, are you?
Any of those changes, as Ms Perkins said, would be subject to internal consideration of any of those changes moving from a project to a program, and then subsequently for government approval. They would not have that scope varied, because that would impact on cost and schedule and other parameters. No doubt, no doubt. And this is kind of where I'm getting to, right? Is that there has been much conjecture about the major projects report, and even the Senate moved a motion about whether or not this report should be reinstated. However, the examples that we've run through is that minimum viable capability is not assessed in the same way in which the original NPR was designed. Phases, if you can provide the details of projects that have been taken out of phases and into programs, and any changes to those scope, that would be very much appreciated if you could take that on notice. There's also not for publication increases over time. So if you look at figure 4.8 on page 46, which is a summary of expected capability, scope and delivery by year, the little green tube keeps getting bigger and bigger each year, signalling that Defence is now delivering expected capability and scope delivery by year up to 97.7%, with the unlikely or under threat reducing from, over 5% to now, just over 2%. But really, that's a oversimplistic way of actually demonstrating potential changes from scope, changes from publication, changes from phases to programs, changes from delivery of the original budgets to what is now being delivered. Like, there's a whole lot of stuff that doesn't tell, which is not. It is not actually a criticism of Defence. It is actually a criticism of the way in which this report is compiled each year, which doesn't, frankly, give the Parliament consistent, annual, accurate information of capability, expenditure and delivery of that. And it's very technical and it's very difficult, and a lot of people don't understand it, but actually all of what you've just said and all of the evidence points to the fact that we need to find a better way to do this. And the advice that the committee received from the Auditor-General and the statement that the committee received from the Auditor-General around performance reports, which actually will hopefully enable more clarity around these sorts of decisions and acquisitions and timing, not to jeopardise national security interests, but to do so in a way that gives Parliament the ability to oversee defence acquisition in a legitimate way, I think is essential. And I just want to sort of, for the sake of, this is the first time the committee has met since the Senate moved its motion, but as the chair of the committee, the decision by the committee was absolutely not one the decision by the committee to not seek a continuation of the NPR was not a decision of the committee to walk away from defence scrutiny. On the contrary, Defence, for some reasons that are very legitimate and some reasons that are very technical, are very good at navigating this to make this report seem like everything's improving, but actually we don't really know the answer to that. So we need to find a better way to do that, and that's something that the committee has committed to do. That is the end of my rant. Apologies, everyone, but I will hand over to Ailey.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for coming today and for appearing before us. I just want to really, as a new member of the committee, back in what Josh has just said, and in particular, when you're looking at these types of reports, one of the things that stood out for me is that we no longer have a yearly comparative we don't have any comparative information on slippage on major projects. And no real idea of the performance of defence overall on major projects that we can compare against other years. And correct me if I'm wrong, ANAO, as a new member of the committee. But yeah, the idea that, you know, I think 19 out of 21 major projects were impacted by NFP. And I'm not saying that they, you know, that they shouldn't, the reasons behind the NFPs, but not being able to get a medium value for slippage on projects to give you some sort of an idea of the performance on these projects compared to previous years, I think, you know, that's kind of critical. In terms of the Parliament having confidence in Defence's performance, I think that yeah, it's disappointing. But my question is, why do we have no, you know, median values and comparative information on slippage on these major reports that we can't compare from year to year?
I'm not sure whether that might be a question for the ANAO firstly.
So thank you for the question, and through you, Chair. There's a couple of things there. So the report does provide at an aggregate level what the slippage is in total, which is across all the 21 projects. So the median slippage, acknowledging that projects are brought on concurrently, is at the median and average is 21 months. The total manpower effort of the slippage is the 404 months, but we sort of introduced the median of 21 months because we do acknowledge that projects are brought on concurrently. The issue of not for publication is that before 4 years ago, we were able to provide analysis at the project level to unpack meaningfully where that slippage occurred, but with not for publication, we can only now provide that information at an aggregate level, and from a parliamentary scrutiny, not provide that where the project slippage has occurred. Not making a judgment around not for publications, we accept that as a process that Defence has to go through, and it's a very thorough process that Defence goes through. But the other bit that's just been touched on is the issue of rebaselining and the effect that has on slippage. So I think there was a discussion around that, Chair, and I'll just point to paragraph 4.23. So 4.23 is an example of where a project can be renamed, and that's legitimately, so that's occurred through the 2024 IIP rebuild, and that's in the case of Triton. So Triton's one where we can name. So Triton was removed, which was Air 7000 Phase 1B, was removed from Air 7000 and established under a new project named Air 7001. Now, there are reasons around that, and as a limited assurance review, we don't sort of go into the detail around that. But what it does do, in saying the report, is it changes the rebaselining around IOC and FOC milestones. In paragraph 2.5, we sort of point out that the effect of that is that it generally resets to zero. So it is true around what you were pointing to around not the green tubes, I think you referred to, but it does reset to zero. But the implication of not for publication is that we can't then necessarily unpack why that is.
Yeah. Ms. Perkins, how would we remedy that? Ms. Perkins, how would we remedy that?
I'm sorry, Deputy Chair. In Mr Goodwin's answer, there was a bunch of issues. Which part would you have us address?
The reporting bit around was it non-disclosure?
Not for publication.
Not for publication?
Yeah. Look, Thank you. It is a really important question. I'll start and Major General Pearce might follow. We work very, very hard on this product, on this audit and report with ANAO. It's an enormous body of work. And I think the fundamental difference over time is the deterioration of the strategic environment, the highly classified nature of most of the projects that make up the projects in the MPR, and the judgments that we apply through security and strategic review of the details of those projects. We are completely committed to sharing all of that information with the ANAO as they undertake the audit activities. But the not-for-disclosure element has been the application of security considerations at a project-by-project level about what disclosure of some of that information publicly puts into the public domain and allows for our adversaries to understand about the pace with which we're delivering critical capability for the Australian Defence Force. I think that's part of the conversation about the limited future utility of the MPR and the ways in which we can work to support ANAO through the audit the Auditor General referred to of both the investment program and performance measure 6.1 to look at performance in ways that better meet the needs of parliamentary scrutiny. So it is a very detailed analysis, project by project, on all the elements of the project. All of the information is shared with ANAO, but what elements, for security reasons, Defence makes a professional judgment, should not be disclosed in the public report.
What we might do, if people are okay, and given I'm the chair, they will be, we might just take a 2-minute pause in the hearing just to give everyone a chance to have a quick breather, and then we'll come back and finish. And I'll throw to either back to Ailey or to Carol or Mary after a quick interlude. So we'll just pause the hearing for a minute or two, and we'll come back in just a jiffy. And reopen the hearing, and I'll throw to Ms Berry.
Thank you. I also wanted to really support those comments that have been made by the Chair and Ms France in relation to just as someone who's coming into Parliament, I was elected in May last year, just being able to get good oversight of these projects that you are undertaking, and to have that, what I would consider to be an acceptable amount of scrutiny over these matters, noting your points, very important points around national security. I do think that there is going to be increased public interest in defence spending. This is a considerable spend on the part of the taxpayer, and I do hope that moving forward we can have more meaningful oversight just in the broader public interest. So I wanted to make that as my opening statement. I've just got a couple of specific questions. One of them relates to risk management. So since the inception of the MPR back in 2008, 2009, risk management has been a focus. And while it seems Defence have made efforts to centralise key governance processes, including risk management, it appears that weaknesses in controls within Defence's risk management system, Predict, I believe it's called, which have been identified in the 2022-2023 MPR, have not yet been addressed by Defence. And I wondered if you could speak to that.
Thank you very much, Ms Berry. It's Chris Deeble, DEPSEC CASG. We've done a lot of work in risk, and the risk tool Predict is a fundamental part of how we manage risk in the major projects. The work that we've done more recently, in November of 25, we've updated our Defence Capability Acquisition and Sustainment Group Risk Management Manual. And that's aiming to address many of those issues that you've just raised. So being more specific about how to manage those risks, providing more direction to individuals within projects around that is what we're attempting to do. We're also looking at this through the lens of professionalisation. So we're putting a lot of time and effort now into how we professionalise our people with respect to project and program management, and the way in which they need to ensure that risk, contingency and all of these particular aspects are linked together. And that includes working groups and communities of practice that deliver those outcomes. It's a very complex for these large complex programs. I'd note that somewhere in the region of 95% of the projects captured here in the MPR in particular are what we call Acquisition Category 1 and Acquisition Category 2. Acquisition Category 1 I would liken to a mega program in ICT or infrastructure. They are very large, complex programs. They're normally represented by large dollar values, very complex stakeholder engagement, technically challenging, and other aspects of that we use to characterise that. And as I said, 95% of this MPR or last year's MPR is at that highest complexity. Therefore, the risk profile associated with that is much more complex to manage. That's why we use a tool like Predict to be able to do that. But we've changed the manual. We do regular work now, and professionalisation is the method by which we are aiming to uplift our personnel. Professionalisation is fundamentally important from a CASG perspective, and arguably in the immediate future from a Defence Delivery Group and Defence Delivery Agency as we go through that reform. Professionalising most critically project and program management and commercial and procurement is where our focus is at this juncture.
Thank you. And that leads nicely. I've got two more questions. That leads nicely into our next one. So you have said that your professionalism program has achieved a measurable improvement in schedule health. What rate of improvement have you observed, particularly in the last 6 months. And can you tell us a little bit more about that professionalisation program? What does that consist of?
I can take it on notice to give you some specifics because we run a lot of master classes and a lot of training that's been conducted in this regard. So I would happily come back to you in terms of the nature of the work that we're doing in that regard. We've also applied a number of other mechanisms across these projects that go to project and procurement. So we're doing procurement assurance. So we run through and look at all of the procurement across defence. Sometimes that has programmatic. As you can imagine, commerciality and programmatics go hand in glove in terms of project performance and risks that are realised in that regard. But I'll be more than happy to give you some specifics around that. It is very hard to characterise exactly how many projects have got the strong linkages. I note that there is some comment in here, and Mr Goodwin may be able to make a comment from an ANAO perspective. This last review identified, I think, 3 projects that didn't have a strong linkage between their risk log, and their contingency assessment. That's continually improving, and as I said, the risk manual, the work that we're doing in professionalisation is uplifting that. But I'm happy to take on notice to give you some more specifics about risk training and how we're conducting that over the last year.
Thank you. And just my final question, which relates to lessons and the lessons that have been captured from the MPR. And as I understand it, a lesson becomes a lesson learned once recommendations from the lessons have been implemented and outcomes validated. So there was 9 action items relating to the 2023-2024 and the 2024-2025 MPRs that have been identified and closed. And there does seem to be a theme when we've analysed previous lessons that a key standout seems to relate to the need for better communication. And I wondered if you could speak to that. And if you don't perceive that to be a theme, what would you perceive to be themes of those lessons learned?
Look, I think the lessons learned, if you look at that at the project level, you will often get observations rather than lessons learned. At that project layer, they can be quite tactical. What we're trying to do now with a CASG board that looks at lessons learned is actually pull the threads. You could imagine that something that's encountered in one project might be worded subtly different in another project. So the CASG Lessons Learnt Board is actually going through that and trying to standardise, those outcomes that we're looking at in that regard. So the board now is a much more rigorous process of being able to look at what is strategic and systematic. At the project level, you often won't get strategic and systematic, but we're trying to, when we do the top level review and we translate that back in, we're trying to get common taxonomy for the way in which those lessons learned are described. And through that lessons learnt board, we're trying to make sure that they are communicated to future projects in a way that guarantees they won't repeat those lessons learnt. So lessons learnt around, I think if I was to give you some of the key themes we see in our reporting process, industry capability and capacity, contract management, design maturity and technical challenges, financial management, capability integration. They're the top 5 acquisition themes that we see that would relate to a number of these lessons learned.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Ailey, did you still want to ask another question?
No, I'm all good, thank you.
Given we've got a little bit of time left, and if we get through every question, Deputy Chair, do you have anything? Then we can maybe clock off a tiny bit early, but just a question on table 4.2, that it says that the advanced growler is $2.9 billion over the approved scope increases. Can you go through why it's become $2.9 billion more expensive?
Table 4.2, Chair.
Forgive me, Mr. Deeble. 4.2, yep, on page 37.
Page 37. So these are projects, so table 4, or figure 4.2, is that?
That's it?
Yep. Okay, is projects with government-approved scope increases over 0.5 billion. So if you were to look in, and I'd need to go back, and there's another table that would refer to this, that means that government has subsequently approved additional scope for that particular program. I noted before, if you look at 4.2, it talks about Hunter class and the Joint Strike Fighter. In both cases, that was the additional money approved as a consequence of moving into production for the Hunter. In the case of Joint Strike Fighter, that related to the additional 58 aircraft approved by government. And the advanced growler would be specifically around increases in scope agreed by government for those projects.
And what were those increases in scope?
So this is the Next Generation Jammer Development Program. So table 4.1 describes the aircraft upgrades, missiles, electronic warfare, range upgrades and associated sustainment costs. So that's the scope increases that would be part and parcel of that increased scope agreed by government.
So, so the Next Generation Jammer and acquisition of aircraft upgrades, missiles and electronic warfare, and associated sustainment costs, approval for facilities offset by transfers between CASC and other areas of defence. CASG. I'm terrible with the defence acronyms. Forgive me. There's a lot of them. So why? I mean, why was the original first pass approval a sort of $271 million project, but actually, you know, like why put that in without missiles, jammer development and acquisition, aircraft upgrades, warfare range? Like why put it in for the original project without kind of, sounds like most of the stuff you need is part of the growler project.
That could be true in this particular case, and I'm happy to take on notice some more detail in here. But the Advanced Growler program is a combination of some FMS elements, foreign military sales, and some cooperative program components to that. So we are working closely then with those program officers within the US system to determine what those programs will look like incrementally over time. So at this point in time, with the original second pass approval, there would have been defined scope, worked with the US in terms of what would be reasoned or reasonable to agree at that point in time. The Next Generation Jammer is a step up from the jammer that came with the growler capability, and it is building on a new capability. So this would have come along as part of a phased program of work with the US government to continue to evolve the growler capability. But Chair, I'm happy to take it on notice to give you some more definitive understanding of that.
Okay, thank you. I think, what about the Triton? What increases in scope happen with the Triton?
So the Triton program, Air 7000 originally 1B and now termed Air 7001, as noted by Mr Goodwin before, had an interesting gestation. It was originally approved for 4 aircraft. We now have 3 of those aircraft in country. There was a production pause in the States. This is a cooperative program where we're working with the US Navy on this. It was done in cooperation. Air 7000 originally had the P8 program and the Air 7000 Triton program. Because of that production pause and some concern about the maturity of that program, government determined that we would agree the program at aircraft by aircraft. So even though it was originally approved for 4 aircraft with an IOC, there was some specific decisions made about the maturity of the platform and some of the inherent capability, and a production pause, which then led to a decision by government to delay later purchases.
Okay. Makes sense. I don't think I've got too many more questions to unpack in my notes. I think for the purposes of not for publication and in the committee's sort of future engagement with the future Defence Committee of the Parliament, as in our committee's engagement, what will be the Parliamentary Committee on Defence ability to see the non-for-publication information and data?
You take it in camera.
Thank you, Chair. Celia Perkins, Acting Associate Secretary. Look, I think one of the important elements of design for the new committee will be the capacity to undertake hearings at a classified level, and in that way it will operate in similar ways to the Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence. I think one of the areas we'll be very keen to explore and understand is the capacity to speak to some of those matters I described earlier that we would consider not for publication, where we could have a more detailed conversation about some of the underpinning capability milestones and classified details in the new committee.
Thank you very much for that advice, Ms Perkins. It's very, very helpful. The reason why I asked it is because one of the things that the committee has undertaken is to think about ways in which this process could be adapted for the circumstances that we all find ourselves in, and to be clear, I think there are 2 principles that are essential here. One is that the Department of Defence and the Australian Defence Force need to be able to make decisions and give advice in the interests of national security. That is the first priority. The second priority is that when you are spending a significant amount of Australians' taxpayer dollars, the Parliament, as the representative body of Australian taxpayers outside of the executive, should have some ability to scrutinise that at a level which is effective. So finding a way in which the Parliament can perform that role in line with potentially the access that it originally got with the original design of the NPR is kind of the job of our committee, and that's what we're considering. But that advice around what the classified information that committee can receive, and at least in the same way that the Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security can make recommendations on these sensitive matters, but do so in a way that gives consideration to the classified information in a way that is in the public interest, is also something that we will be exploring with our colleagues. Anything from you, Deputy Chair?
An observation. Well, in a previous committee in the Public Works for projects referred by Defence post, over the 15 million, it was often common practice for some of Defence requests to be made in camera for the very purpose. The fact that that doesn't, or is not a tool used on this committee, is beyond me, but it'll be something that it needs to be addressed. The firewall there of saying no, it's cabinet, it's secure, is particularly when there's a layer of scrutiny disappearing. So we need to replace it with something, and I'll have those conversations with my colleagues. But My final observation would be that there has been long-standing practices which have addressed the issues that you've raised, and we're absolutely sensitive to them and have been for decades. Yeah. Thank you.
On that triumphant note, friends, I am going to try and get on a plane back to Melbourne, but before I do, let me thank everyone for giving evidence here today. There were a few questions on notice, so if we can come back to the committee by the Secretariat by Thursday the 14th of May, and also if the committee does have further questions, they will be sent to you in writing. Mary, you've just popped on the screen. Did you have any questions before I close this? Ailey? Last chance, going once, going twice. All right. So if we do have further questions, we send you in writing through the Secretariat. To all of the officials in the room, I sincerely thank you for the honest and robust way in which we've all engaged here. But it is an important exercise, and I do thank you all very much, not just for today, but for your service as well. And on that note, we will close the hearing. I thank the broadcasters, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you.